Good evening, everybody. We've got a huge turnout here, 99. I know we're going over 100. That's fantastic. I am Clayton Spencer, president of Bates, and I am so honored to be on the program with this group of fantastically accomplished women who were leaders in every different sport here during their time at Bates and remain leaders in the world. And I would never be on a panel of look at how these amazing athletes did in their later life. I can tell you that. But I am thrilled to be here and part of a celebration about Title IX, because I am this old. During most of my growing up, Title IX did not exist. And when I went to high school, I'm from North Carolina, basketball crazed. All I did every day, all day, was shoot baskets in my back, the back area of the house or the outside. Basketball crazed, but I went to a county high school that had no girls teams. So there was nothing, and no apology, no self-consciousness about it. And then I, by a fluke, switched schools in the middle of 11th grade, and they had amazing teams. And I got to play basketball beginning then. I played in another NESCAC college. But the deal is, I am an incredibly mediocre athlete. In fact, I aspire to mediocrity. Mediocrity is a stretch goal for me. And I'm sitting here with all these fantastically talented athletes. And so now I have actually internalized that I just need to enjoy watching sports and participating in that way. And one of the joys of my time here, and one of the deep deprivations of COVID, has been the loss of certain seasons. But in a regular season, I realize that participating in sports at any level, but particularly in a varsity sport in a NESCAC college, is one of the most powerful developmental experiences there is. You have to figure out your specific excellence. So you'll see in the bios of our speakers tonight, some are defensive players, some are offensive players. Track and field is a thrower. It's functional excellence that you don't achieve if you don't have the conditioning and the discipline to get there. It's a life skill because it's about figuring out what you're good at. You're not going to work hard at anything that you're not good at, which is probably why I didn't keep going with athletics. And just having the discipline, which are amazing life skills. And then you throw in teamwork, and all anybody talks about now is how, everybody works on teams, you're working globally, all of these things talk about collaboration. But the two things I notice most about teamwork are generosity, and the generosity of spirit required to make that team the best it can be. And it can be as little a thing as, do I drive for the layup when it's a little crowded down there, or do I look and pass off? And do I congratulate the woman who just took the seat in my boat? There are a million different versions of it, but teamwork is not just some sort of vague notion of collaboration. It's generosity. It's also, how does the bench support the players on the floor? And I watch that. I will tell you, it's a joy at the moment to watch our phenomenal basketball team and women's basketball. I'm speaking of now, but both are wonderful to watch. But women's basketball team and that bench, I think they spend every bit as many calories as the players running up and down the court, just participating and engaging. So, and the most important life experience of athletics is, it's really got to be one of the top areas where you learn what it feels like. You learn the sense of joy and purpose when the whole really is greater than the sum of the parts, when you pull it all together. And I mean, they talk about swing if you're a rower. Teal, I'm not sure exactly what they talk about when you're a thrower, like how you get that feeling. Certainly I see it on the basketball court. So I just want to say, you guys not only had a great experience, you brought your own talent and hard work to it and achieved amazingly on the court or floor or whatever, and off in field at Bates. And guess what? That's what you're all doing in life too. So I am humbled and proud to be here, proud to be asked to serve as president of an institution that graduates such phenomenal people. And I'm just going to sit back and listen to this beautiful panel. So welcome, everybody. And I think my goal now is to turn this over to Amanda, who will be our moderator.
Yes, hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Amanda Kaufman. I am a senior at Bates right now, a member of the track and field team, and very excited to be here amongst these incredible women and to hear their stories. So to start out, I'd love to introduce everyone so you guys can get kind of a background on all that everyone has accomplished. So first off, we have Nancy Ingersoll Fiddler, class of 1978, who was a pioneer in Bates women's athletics, who became a 14-time national champion in Nordic skiing. And then after Bates went on to become a 2-time Winter Olympian. Welcome, Nancy. Next up, we have Carolyn Campbell-McGovern, class of 1983, the college's first All-American in women's lacrosse, and now has served as the Deputy Executive Director of the Ivy League office since July of 2009. Welcome, Carolyn. Next, we have Katie Burke, class of 2003, a defensive specialist in volleyball for Bates. She is the Chief People Officer at HubSpot and national expert in how companies can deliver an inclusive candidate and employee experience. Welcome, Katie. And next, we have Vantille Elizabeth Duncan, class of 2010, a Mainer. Teal is also a 6-time All-American thrower for Bates and a finalist for the NCAA Women of the Year in 2010. Teal has worked for the world's largest NGOs and is currently with Vetro FiberMap, managing a program that helps deliver broadband internet to rural communities across the country. Welcome, Teal. And finally, we have Amelia Wilhelm, class of 2018, a Bates rowing national champion, campus life leader, and finalist for the NCAA Women of the Year in 2018. Amelia is currently enrolled at the University of Washington in the medical scientist training program, pursuing an MD and a PhD. Welcome, Amelia. Thank you all for being here. And to get us started, I would love to just kind of read what Title IX is, because it's such a short law, but it has such a far-reaching impact. So to get us started, Title IX states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And I also put that in the chat just so we have that as we get the conversation started. All right. And to start us off, I would love to hear from all of our panelists. If you guys could just share your favorite memory from Bates. It could be something you're particularly proud of or just a highlight. So why don't we start off with Amelia?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be on this panel with all of these amazing women. I think my favorite memory from my Bates athletic career, I think I'm supposed to say something about a championship race, but I think the most special moments come from practice. And I think about one practice in the spring of my summer of my senior year, where we were all gearing up for NCAAs, getting nervous, but also getting excited. And we had the most perfect conditions, the most perfect weather. and we had just the most perfect row. I think, Clayton mentioned this, like the concept of swing, where everyone is really moving together. And I think it feels like the beautiful kind of, tie up of my whole college career, where I felt really like we were just one single body moving together.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Next, why don't we go to Teal? Same question.
On that same note, dealing with, and in a new sense, thinking about community and what sports brings, I think my favorite Bates moment, and specifically that's attached to sports, actually also didn't happen actually on the field or in the circle. It actually happened from a mailbox for me. I had received a letter from a graduate at that point. Her name was Katie Hughes, and she was a thrower and in that class. And I had opened up the letter to find a thank you from her, because my senior year, I had started a Bates throwing clinic, and she was one of the first participants, and that was one of her first memories of Bates, and one of the many reasons, I'm sure, that she chose to come here. But seeing someone like me from Maine being able to throw successfully at Bates, and then thanking me as an alum. And like I said, it was just something I never expected. Got it in the mailbox, and it's something that's still on my refrigerator today. Just screams the sense of community that not only we want with women in sports and for support, but also what in the end it needs, and what we thrive on, and continues to impact us every single day.
Wow, that's awesome. Katie, I had the pleasure of being Katie's teammate, so that story is especially wonderful to hear. Thank you. Next, let's go to Katie. If you could talk about your favorite Bates memory.
I love that story. I'm like tearing up over here.
Yeah.
I'm going to echo Amelia and Teal's storylines, which are my favorite memories of Bates are walking across the quad to get to alumni gym and knowing that your only job for the next 2 hours was to focus on getting better and being a great teammate. I would give anything for the rest of your life. You never get 2 hours back in a day where your only job is to be a great teammate. And for me, I have this really vivid memory of Carol, the athletic department secretary, who is a pillar of the Bates athletic community. And I'm just seeing her, you'd be like, everything's going to get better. So if you had a bad day, a great day, whatever, you were just kind of like, okay, I'm here. This is time to check in. And similar to Teal's story, years later, I was going through a rough time and I got a package in the mail, and it was from Carol, and it was an extra pair of Bates sweats. And she just said, like, I'm thinking of you. And so for me, it's just like, you're part of something so much bigger that goes above and beyond the team. And it's part of the whole Bates athletic community. So that's mine.
Wow, that's awesome. That is so true. I really feel like there's such a network of Bates alums, whether it's your teammates or just kind of people that you meet along the way. That's awesome. And now I would love to hear from Carolyn, if you could share the same thing, your favorite Bates memory.
Sure. I'm going to continue on the same theme, of course, because my best Bates memories are the times spent with my teammates. And I'll point to particularly my senior year in field hockey. We had a really great team and a really fun group. And my co-captain and I would try to get everybody psyched up for every game. So I would be in charge of writing the poem that would ever get everybody excited. And she would bring the candy of the day. And there was one day that we were thinking we didn't have any candy. And so she went to the vending machine and was like buying all the candy out of the vending machine just to make sure we could keep our streak. And we did win that game. So anyway, that championship season is what stands out to me as one of my best Bates memories.
Wow. Yeah, it really is those little moments that make so much of a difference in our time here. And finally, Nancy, if you could share your favorite Bates moment.
Yeah, just to echo everybody there, it's the small things. And, I think about, all the van rides to ski practice at Lost Valley and the bus rides to hockey games, and those moments that when you're in them, you're not sure they're special, but when you think back, they become just enormous. And, you know, I also really love, I'm not going to do the most important one, but, you know, I'm going to just kind of give you a flavor of some of the things that sit with me. And I don't know if they still do this anymore, but when we would start a hockey game out on the field there, out of JB Hall, we would play the William Tell Overture on a scratchy record player. And so the beginning of every hockey game was we would wait for the scratchy sound, and then there it was. And I have to say that moment gave all of us so much optimism, because there we were going into the fight. You know, nobody knew what the outcome would be, but we all felt so optimistic at that moment. And it was such a feeling. Anyway, I remember that. And
I was there in the early 80s too.
oh, good. Yeah. It's anyway, that was a great tradition. And I just want to say that there's so many full circle moments. And for me, my daughter went to Bates and graduated in 17, and she was also a Nordic skier. So it was amazing when I walked into Coach Becky Wood's office to meet Laurel for her interview with Becky. There was her father, Bob, and he was my coach, and he was right there. And there was Becky, who I knew as a child while I was at Bates. And it's just this amazing feeling of, wow, I'm handing my daughter off to these people who I know so well. It's like family. And I found out at that moment that Bob, coach, we called him, he handed me this very ancient looking certificate in a frame, and it was my All-American certificate from 1978. And he said, he took it off the wall over his desk. He said, I have something to confess. I've kept this here. I never gave it to you. It's been sitting at my desk for whatever it was, 40 years.
Wow.
Anyway, that was huge. So
Wow.
Big moment.
That is a big moment for sure. Yeah, and Nancy, going off of that, of all of our panelists, I think you had the first experiences of Bates after Title IX passed in 1972, arriving in 74, if that's correct. What was the atmosphere like? What was kind of like the awareness of it? And what challenges did you face as a female athlete just after the passing of Title IX?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't feel that I did have any challenges, and maybe I just didn't know that I had challenges. But I was fortunate to go to a great high school in Weston, Massachusetts, where I walked right into field hockey, lacrosse, and diving teams, where I was given every opportunity possible. So I had that expectation when I went to college. Now, Bates at the time had field hockey, which was fairly established. I just read when it began, but it was an established team at that point. And so I played hockey, and I knew going in that there wasn't a lacrosse team. And I also knew there wasn't a pool, if you can imagine.
Wow.
So I said, there goes diving. I wasn't very good anyway. And lacrosse I adored and was sad about that. But it turns out after the field hockey season ended, I spoke with my coach, Sherry Yakowanis, and assistant coach Pat Smith, and they wanted to see this happen. And my roommate and I, or she wasn't my roommate that year, but anyway, another gal from the hockey team and I had both played high school lacrosse, and we said, we want this to happen.
Yeah.
And Pat Smith took it on. She said, I don't know much about lacrosse, but you girls do. So if we do this, we could be a club, and you would have to bring skills to your fellow athletes. And I'm there to organize and to help. And I think we walked into the athletic director's office and we said, we want to do this. And he said, no problem. We need to find some equipment. And we found they were kind of used gear. I don't know where it even came from.
Oh.
And we had our hockey uniforms, and we went out and we just coerced a bunch of people, like mostly the hockey players, to play lacrosse. And we were so bad that first year. We played as a club, and we got spanked pretty hard because we played some legit teams. But you know what? It was so much fun to be part of bringing it forward. And it wasn't hard. There wasn't any resistance, and everyone wanted to see it happen. And the following year we were a full varsity status team, and then we began right away to attract lacrosse players, and boom, it happened really quickly. The other thing that happened when I was there was when I got into Nordic, which wasn't till my sophomore year. So I did that because there was no pool, as I said, and I got recruited. I was actually being recruited by the track and field team, and I'm not a really big person, but they're like, we need people to throw. And I'm like, I didn't even know what it was. So I was like, well, I'm kind of raising my hand, but I don't really want to. And then I did get, at the same time, waylaid by the Nordic coach. And he said, oh, we need people on the Nordic team. And I said, well, I don't know how to do that. And he said, but we'll teach you. So I'd been an alpine skier, and here was this opportunity to join Nordic. So I ditched the track team. I said, nope, can't do that. And I began the Nordic team, which was only really, I think it was like 1 or 2 years old at that point.
Oh.
And we were not, the men's team was D1, which both men's and women's now are. All the NESCAC Nordic teams are D1. But so we were in this funky little Division 2. And anyway, so that was an easy. And I walked out there my first day in pair of Levi's, and I said, here I am. And
Wow.
learned how to ski, and it was an incredible opportunity. And the same thing went with the cross country running. So when I became a Nordic skier, I thought, wow, we should be training by running. No team, we formed a club, we ran against Bowdoin and a couple other clubs, and the next year we went full varsity status again. So I want to say that Bates really embraced the Title IX and gave anybody who asked the opportunity to say, this needs to happen for women. And it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And just a few years later, Bates had its first All-American, Carolyn, in lacrosse. So it's incredible to see like the trailblazing effort that it took just to get these sports off the ground. And we're so lucky that Bates was so gung-ho, and that we had people like yourself that were there to get those off the ground. So thank you. So now, Carolyn, could you tell us about your role as the executive director of the Ivy League? What does that entail, and kind of how do you interact with Title IX in that role? And is there any other aspects of Title IX that people should know from the work that you do?
Well, thanks. And again, thanks, Nancy, for starting that lacrosse team. It was definitely made a giant difference in my experience and life. I went on, from work being a lacrosse player at Bates to being an assistant lacrosse coach when I was at business school at Temple University, and they happened to be the defending national champion in women's lacrosse, which may have been really why I wanted to go there. So that really definitely put a trajectory on my life, and it went from there to being able to have several different positions in athletics before my current position in the Ivy League. And our office works with all 8 Ivy League schools and doing everything they do related to athletics and regulating a lot. Mostly my world is about the regulations they've adopted that determine sort of how athletics is conducted. And in every conversation, we always are considering equity and being fair. And then I say, in that sense, that's how Title IX comes into play in what we're doing. In the Ivy League schools, some of them probably had a little different experience in converting in 1972. Bates really just had to add a few women's teams that they might not have already, but in thinking about how to make things equitable and providing the educational experience that athletics brings to all of their students. But at several Ivy League schools, they didn't have any women students. And so it was a much bigger transition. And so there's still some remnants of that, of course, because the men's teams have been in place for over 100 years and the women's teams have not. And so, but the things, what the main thing that I'm really happy about. And even in the time that I've been involved in athletics in the Ivy League, which was when I started at Dartmouth in 1987. And the main change is the total mindset now of everybody being on the same page, that we all are trying to do the right thing. We're really all trying to make sure that things are equitable. And to have the Ivy League has come a long way also in the sense that there are now 3 Ivy League women presidents, and there are 4 Ivy League women athletic directors, and all of the schools have had at least one of each, if not both, over my tenure. So I think that whole the way everybody approaches what they're doing related to Title IX. In particular, the things that we regulate, in admissions, financial aid, playing in practice seasons, the number of days that students can come back and practice before they start competing, all of those things we look at pretty regularly to make sure that they're equitable.
Yeah, and that equity is so important because without it and without Title IX, we wouldn't be here having this panel and talking about how sport has propelled all of us forward and in our careers. And yes, thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. That's very helpful. So there's this statistic that kind of has always stuck out to me that 94% of women in C-suites positions had played sports at some point, which I think is just mind-blowing. So Katie, as a Chief People Officer at HubSpot, how did your Bates career inform your current leadership skills in your position now?
Absolutely. So I'm rethinking a lot of things because no other varsity coach asked me to be on their team, and Nancy seems to have been asked by like 18 different teams. So I'm definitely the most mediocre athlete on this panel, but that is okay. I think regardless of how highly you performed, you can still benefit. And I echo what the data says about how sports helps prepare people for the C-suite. So a few things that stick out to me about being an athlete in the C-suite, and a few reasons I think female athletes are so likely to end up in the C-suite. One is feedback. I think growing your career means you need to be open and taking a lot of feedback. When you're an athlete, feedback comes in multiple forms. I shanked a lot of passes in alumni gym, and so you get feedback on how it feels to actually mess up. But then you also get feedback from your teammates and your coach regularly, and it turns out to become a C-level executive, you need to be very open to that feedback. And then you also need to be good at giving it. And so I think that's a big part of it. Number 2, I think, is failure. You learn to fail with high and low stakes, and you learn to fail at a micro level, both personally and as a team. And ultimately, your career is going to require a lot of resilience. And I think being an athlete teaches you to kind of operate that way as a default. And then I loved what Carolyn said about the fun and how she and her roommate got everyone fired up with a poem and music and candy. To me, the third F is really fun. And so from my perspective, when you're working hard as a part of a team, you're going to have to do some really hard things. You're going to have to endure through some hard times. And to me, what I notice about athletes in the room is they're always figuring out ways to make it a challenge or make it fun or figure out a way to make the last lap more enjoyable. And so I think that's part of the reason, one of the many reasons you see so many female athletes in the C-suite.
Wow, that makes so much sense. I think it really goes to show how sports really sets you up for success, and you don't have to be, the starter, the best on the team to really reap those benefits. And it just shows how important that equity of sport and inclusion for women and girls is just of the utmost importance. And so do you think there's any other skills? I mean, obviously there are, other than leadership, that sport has taught you that you use on the daily in your work now?
Yeah, so it turns out one really important part of being a chief people officer is recruiting. And I got my first exposure to recruiting when I was a sophomore. I was asked to host, or I was a freshman rather, and I got asked to host Liz Wanless, who was being recruited heavily by a school down the road, Colby. And let's just say she was basically committed to Colby. And she turned out to be an All-American volleyball player and thrower. And so she was a huge and incredible track and field athlete. And basically what Colby did, no shade to Colby, this is like rising tide lifts all boats panel, but come on. But basically they were recruiting her really hard, and my coach asked me to host her, and Colby rolled out the red carpet with a bunch of fancy stuff and tried to really wine and dine her. And what we did was we were who Bates really is. We were authentic, we were fun, we were quirky. We took her, I think, to like a Deansman concert, and we went to like some sort of costume theme party. And overnight she changed her mind and she declared that she was going to Bates. And so for me, what it taught me was, if you can recruit people who are better than you are, and Liz, by the way, was light years better than I was at anything, your team gets so much infinitely better. And so the ability to recruit people is so important. It's one of the reasons one of our best recruiting managers at HubSpot is a former softball player at Bates. And so I think if you're able to recruit great people to your team, I think that's a huge feature that comes from being a great athlete. That is a huge critical part of my leadership. I think the other thing is just the willingness to put yourself out there and raise your hand. So just to give you an indication of how bad an athlete I was, I went to a new high school as a freshman in high school, and I tried out for the JV volleyball team, and they posted the list, and I wasn't on that list, and I was like heartbroken. And so I was crying, and I went over to the coach, and my parents had said, if you get cut, you got to go up there and just volunteer, just see what you can do. And so I said, you know, Coach Vinny, would you ever let me like keep score? And he's like, what are you talking about? You made the team. It was a total clerical error. And so had I not walked up to him, I would never have played at Bates College. And so I think it's just such a good example of like, part of it is just the willingness. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna have to say like, I should, like, Amanda, you did that tonight. I should moderate this panel. I'm gonna be amazing at this. And so I think just being willing to volunteer for things before you're ready is such a valuable skill. And if you're an athlete, you got tapped way before you're ready for a game, for an opportunity. And so I think just that confidence to go, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm here and I'm ready is so important.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of just like willingness to kind of jump in and know that if you put in that effort and that blood, sweat, and tears, that you can accomplish it and you have the skills. And yeah, and just being confident in yourself, that I think is just so powerful. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that I rely on right now in my work at Bates. Thank you. So Teal, on the conversation of careers, you've worked for some of the largest NGOs in the world. What skills from being a student athlete helped your current career?
I'm going, especially since I worked for the UN and American Red Cross for a long time, I'm going to say resiliency out the back, just to piggyback off of a little bit of what Katie said. And first and foremost, thank you, Katie, for getting Liz in. That I never even heard that story. That's amazing. But yeah, so resiliency is key, is a key concept of being able to be flexible, being able to know, and you can plan as much as you want for anything from a meeting, from a webinar like this to a huge program. You can run a department, but you never know. A pandemic might happen and everything might completely change, and you have to be able to twist and turn. I think not only as a student and not only as an athlete, but I think one of the things personally for me, what is so special about my experience at Bates as an athlete is that I was never really told that I couldn't do anything. I was never told I basically decided when I came to Bates, when I decided to come to Bates, it was after I made that decision. I went to the coach's office. I went to Jay Hartshort's office and said, hey, by the way, my name is Teal. I've decided to come and I do track. I did not tell a soul really that I was doing track. At that point, I had been a state champion in high school, but I was not putting that on my applications. I was more into just looking for some place where I could be an athlete, where I could be an academic, and also I was a musician. And there was all the places that I had visited after I gotten my acceptance letters, they didn't match up. And I randomly, for a $20 bet, had come to the Bates acceptance day because I was down the street. I had a friend who was at Bates. I had a high school friend that was in the admissions department, who had worked as like an intern in the admissions department. He was running the call the students who had gotten accepted to get them onto campus. No one could pronounce my name, and they raised the sheet up. He knew me, called me up and said, hey, I bet you $20 if you don't come to Bates, like come over to the Bates Students Day, you're not going to leave and you're not going to say yes. And I was like, it's like 20 minutes away from my house. I didn't think I was going to get in. It's okay. I'm trying to figure this out. And I came here. I found out right immediately that I was able to play music. I was able to play music and sing on the choir and be an athlete. That was one of the things that was completely, it shot everyone out. The fact that the music department had said we have athletic rehearsals, I was like, oh, well, at other places I have to pick. I can't be on the pep band and be on the track team, or I can't be on the field hockey team and be in jazz band. I had to pick, but at Bates I didn't. And that's really, taking that experience, taking that type of experience of there's always a will when there's a way, or there's always a way when there's a will, was really instilled at Bates at Bates during the time in which I was an athlete, and it only continued to help prosper and set a true foundation for me to succeed and work in many different for many different organizations around the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's also one of my favorite things about Bates is, and Division III in general, is that you can be an athlete, but you can also be a student. And I think this panel is, as much as it's about sports, it's about everything else that we do as student athletes or in your careers now. And I really think that that's one of my favorite things as well about Bates, is that I can really focus on what I want to do off the track, and then also work to such a high standard on the track and really be able to pursue both of those things. That's incredible. And so, Amelia, moving on to you while we talk about careers. As a rower, you truly exemplified perseverance, going from an alternate on the NCAA team to then rowing in the NCAA championship. What did rowing teach you about perseverance, and how do you use that knowledge today in your dual MD PhD program?
Yeah, I think it's a funny story that, I went from alternate to rowing in the championships my senior year, but I think that's kind of what it looks like. And I think for me, my experience was just that I was a member of the Bates rowing team all 4 years. I think that the framing of like, for me, just the thing that was really important was that, everyone else on the team was getting better. Like the reason I was showing up was to make myself better and to also make everyone else around me better. And I knew that everyone on the team had that same goal for me. And so I think it's easy to persevere and be flexible when everyone else around you is persevering and has their flexibility pants on, as our coach said. So I think that the big picture there is thinking about myself on a team and how my main goal is to work to make those around me better and stronger. And I think it's certainly, I'm kind of new to medicine. I'm in my first year of medical school. But I think what people talk a lot about is medicine as a team sport. And so I think for me, that framing to carry on as throughout my entire career, both in research, I'm very interested in research. And so thinking about building teamwork, building a really supportive environment in the work that I'm doing with the people that I'm working with. I think being able to see a successful, happy, healthy team dynamic at Bates certainly will help me build that in the future. As
kind of a lay person when it comes to medicine, I don't know if I would have ever necessarily thought of it something like that as a team sport, but I think that's totally so true. And yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So now kind of transitioning. So throughout Title IX's history, as we heard from Nancy and Carolyn, when the ball was just kind of getting rolling, women and girls really had to infiltrate these heavily male-dominated spaces, whether that was on the playing field or off the playing field. So I'd love to hear now from our panelists about kind of your shared experience of infiltrating these male-dominated spaces, whether that was in your sport or now. So starting with Teal, I would love to hear about your experience as a female thrower in such a heavily dominated niche of track and field.
Yes, yes, ma'am. So track and field, let me be plainly and honest and upfront. Track
Please.
and field, when we think about track and field in itself, we really truly think of more of the track than the field.
For sure.
And when we think specifically of field events, I think we don't really think about the things that I participated in, which was shot put,
Mhm.
discus, sometimes javelin, but hammer and weight, unless it's a Olympic year for the summer and the next Wii update came out and people want to show me their technique. So being in a sport specifically that is, the imagery is really and highlights is male. It's very I will say it's very difficult, but it's also humbling. Being a thrower from the Bates program specifically, I didn't even know. I told you folks that I didn't really know a lot about the program. I didn't come into Bates knowing a lot. But one of the things that I just found out outside of Liz Wanless's story, which was who is an Olympic trial shot putter that came before me, was we had on the women's team for track and field, we had Faye Holmes and Candace Posey, who participated in weight and hammer throw, that before it was recognized nationally as a sport for women. Like Faye Holmes, as a Bates alum in '94, just in 1994, was one of the first All-Americans, and she was from Bates.
Wow.
So it's and so as such, being in a sport that is often referenced either as a male sport or on the opposite, it's very difficult to break in because you're not seen truly as the typical female because it's so manly, right? So when people think about the hammer throw or shot put, often people say, oh, you did that? That was like the Trunch Bowl in Matilda, right? Like you were that. And it's hard hearing that, as a woman,
sure.
as a person, who that was not the image that I'm trying to convey.
No.
I just wanted to do my sport and not be be thought of as an evil, mean principal. I will say it's one of those things that you don't even think that you have to fight against. Right. And so as such, I will say, in addition, we thankfully the women's team, and specifically the throwers, we had those two athletes that I mentioned in the early 90s that were competing, but then by the time we had like 99, I think we had Heather Bumps, who was a high class javelin thrower. We had Liz Wanless and Keelan Godsey in the early 2000s, who Keelan in itself, he truly is pushing what it is to be an athlete in this space. He just being himself challenged what people thought of before it was cool or popular. And we had me, but post me, the history of Bates and the throwers continued. We had the Katie Hugheses, who was the woman who wrote me a wonderful letter. But then we have, in 2001, we had Genesis, who continued that Bates legacy, And what's also, I think, reassuring and helped prosper fighting that stereotype of this is a male sport, only males can be in it, is the imagery of seeing females do it and succeed, and knowing that you're the next person up, and you have a little bit of pressure, but I had alums come to our practices and help teach me. I had folks show up to, away meets and root me on and tell me of what type of story I was expanding on. So it's just a wonderful, it can be very challenging. It can be it can take a lot of perseverance, but that resiliency that I spoke about earlier is what makes you fight, what makes it all worth it, what makes the late nights, I'm not going to go to a lunch with all my friends. I'm going to go and take an extra I'm going to do an extra weightlifting, or I'm going to do an extra practice. That's what it makes it. You makes it worth it, because you know that you're setting a goal that you ideally, if you can set something, you can achieve it. And so yes, I am in a male sport. Yes, it has been highlighted, but there have been so many women behind me. Unfortunately, all those other males, they were all just my teammates. They were just my teammates alone.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the legacy that Bates throwing has. I feel like, especially being a member of the team now, I feel like we always hear about the men's legacy, which that in itself is highly impressive and incredible. But being a member of the team, I know that we have just as many incredible women who do the same thing and are right there with the men. And yeah, just to shout out our two current throwers now, we have Hope and Alma. So the tradition is continuing, and they are great members of the throwing team. And I have full faith that they are going to continue this legacy for the next women that come along. That's awesome. Thank you, Teal, for that. So now jumping back to Amelia, how do you navigate life as a woman pursuing a career in STEM? And tell us about kind of some of the challenges that you face, and maybe could you expand on how you were sort of introduced into this field and what sort of inspired you to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it maybe I could use a little bit of explanation for, I'm pursuing an MD PhD. So it'll be a career as a physician scientist, where I'll have a research group ideally that I'm leading, as well as a clinical practice, and I'll split time between the two. So I think existing in two different male dominated, and especially at least in leadership fields in medicine and research, I think that what I owe my entry into this path is amazing women mentors that I could see myself in, who said that I would be able to do this. I think even from even in my time at Bates, when I had a fabulous thesis advisor in Polish Lax in the biochemistry department. And as I was choosing a mentor for my thesis project, I was told that by a different professor that I wouldn't be able to balance an honors thesis and athletics and everything else on campus. And looking back, I wonder if he would have said that to a man. And I think it's the same kind of resistance that I think a lot of women in science additionally, take on nurturing roles, or are socialized to and assumed to take on nurturing roles, both in their career and at home. And so I think, this is something that a lot of women are facing, a lot of issues I have experienced even in, working in a research lab after college. I feel like even as the lowest member in the totem pole, we were all we were all cleaning up in the lab, and we were all cleaning up after everyone else. And I think, it's assumed that someone else will take care of things, and usually that's assumed of a woman. And that's a huge issue. And I'm interested in, doing away with that. I think there's also a resistance and a double standard in women who stand up for themselves and who have the confidence to say what they believe. And that's, people will say all sorts of nasty things about women who stand up for themselves and for their colleagues. And so hopefully we someday exist in a world where that's not true. But to kind of end on a more positive note, I do owe everything to the mentors that I have met and found along my way. And I also am, really excited to be at the University of Washington, where I've already found a lot of new great mentors, both on the clinical side and on the science side.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that that really speaks to kind of what Katie was saying about that confidence and knowing that as a woman you can have it all, and you can do, you can be a musician, you can be a student, and you can be an athlete. And I think like all of you guys are such a living, breathing example of that taking place, all because of sport and Title IX, which is just so important. So thank you. And also, before I continue, I just wanted to mention if any members of the audience have questions for any of the panelists or myself, feel free to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll have time at the end if you guys want to ask anything to our panelists. So just before we get too far gone, I wanted to make sure that people knew that they could be involved and interactive. So now moving on, Nancy, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved in sport and who some of your biggest inspirations or models were very early on when women in sport was not quote unquote legitimized around the ratifying of Title IX.
So I have 3 brothers, and so I got involved in sport in the backyard, and I come from a pretty competitive family, and so we were constantly playing outside, and I never really thought of myself as being, the girl in the group of kids I played with, but I just played the sports that were being played. So that was baseball and football and things like that. And so I would say I was influenced by my brothers, who were so willing to just take it out to the, take it out hard and play hard. And my dad supported all of us. He was an athlete himself in high school and college in track. And so he supported all of us equally in sports. And I feel like, my mom didn't have the opportunities that I had, but she supported us too. But I especially felt really lifted up by my father and his willingness to just let me try anything and to go to school, and go ahead, join the Nordic team. You'll be fine. You won't make a fool of, there was nobody who was holding me back ever. And then again too, I was very strongly influenced by high school coaches. My lacrosse and field hockey coaches were women, and they were amazing, and they held a high expectation for me and for the rest of my team. And we jumped for that. And so I found the same thing in college with Coach Yakowanis and Smith. They were amazingly supportive, and they were the women leaders I needed to see at that time. And so while I had this background in sports, I finally saw women leaders and at that level, and it made a difference for me. So I feel really lucky that I had all these people around me and at the right time. And I forget the rest of the question.
Oh no, that was perfect. I was wondering, do you think that kind of like support that you got from your brothers and your dad, do you think that was sort of like a shared experience to other female athletes at the time that you knew of?
Do I feel that they had that same
like support and getting involved in sport kind of around the same time that you were, with Title IX kind of taking off and yeah.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to know. I don't think I was aware at the time of how fortunate I was. And that's kind of sad. And I do know that, when you go to Bates, there are plenty of people who don't do sports. And I had a roommate who never did sports in high school, and I don't think she had the same opportunities that I did. And but no, I don't think I thought about how lucky I was. I just plunged ahead, and I think that set me up well in life, but it also set me up for some hard knocks, because when I became a ski coach, when I retired from my racing career, I decided that I was so I was motivated to share what I knew. And I felt like I didn't want to pass that opportunity to pass it on. And so while I was still, energized by this whole having gone to the Olympics and spending so much time on an international racing circuit, I wanted to go there. And when I found that out, that I wasn't really welcome as a female coach. And that was shocking because I had felt so accepted and supported so long. And it was a little upsetting to be, I felt like a leader. I thought I was a leader, and then I would go into these venues with male coaches and I would be designated to do things that a woman coach might do, like, stay back at the lodgings with the athletes while the men went and tested wax and did important things at the venue that mattered, that I was actually very good at too. And so I kind of had to fight my way back there using, the role models that I knew of in my pathway. But yeah, I had to do some, practice my get up and go. And I wasn't somebody who was always nice to be around. I think when you're a female and you ask for things or you demand that your skills be utilized in the best possible way, you sound shrill. And I didn't enjoy that. And I felt for a long time, I didn't really know who that person was, but, eventually things evened out. And I want to say that I feel like what I did there was more of a leadership role for other women who wanted to become coaches than maybe what I ever did as an athlete. So I like to encourage females to take their skills. And if they're good at waxing and good at the technical part of coaching, they should be right there in that arena. And right now there are so many women Nordic coaches in the NESCAC and Ivy circuit in skiing, at least. And I'm just so happy to see that. And it's great. I feel that those people are being heard just as much. And we didn't, as a coach, I just never felt heard for a long time, but I pushed through that. And maybe I lost some male friends along the way, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah, definitely. There is definitely in kind of the work that I've done in my own research, I have uncovered that after Title IX was ratified in 1972, there actually was a pretty significant decrease in women's coaches. So women's sports started to be coached a lot more by men. So that makes, that is, and like you said, it is unfortunate that you felt like you had kind of the same skill set that all the men had, and still like your voice wasn't heard. But definitely all the work that you did is extremely trailblazing. And I think myself and all the other panelists and women and girls out there for Bates definitely are appreciative for all that you did. Thank you. So Carolyn, I was wondering if you could speak to us about how you have seen the evolution of women in leadership positions in the athletics world, and sort of how have you seen this transition from your time as a student athlete to now as your current role as an administrator in athletics as a woman? Let's see, did we lose Carolyn here? Okay. Okay. We'll maybe give Carolyn a few minutes to rejoin us. All right. Let's see. All right. Well, I hope Carolyn can make it back. Oh, there she is. Can you hear us, Carolyn?
I can hear you. Sorry, I could hear you, but I could tell that my internet was unstable. Sorry about that.
No. Did you happen to hear the question? I'm happy to.
No, I did. I heard the question. So I think to go back to what we were saying before, a couple of things. As as other people pointed out, and you were just saying, when Title IX came into effect, that meant that all of the programs that were being run by women were suddenly given more. Good news is those programs had more resources, right? And and the salaries for the positions that were coaching the women students were higher, but that made them a lot more attractive to men, right? And so because men had already had a lot more opportunities, they were already more experienced, right? So when they were applying for jobs and, oh, we have to give it to the person who has more experience, that was almost always a man because they had been given more opportunities. So it can be a self-perpetuating thing, so Title IX, of course, it applies to women athletes and the benefits they get, but it doesn't apply to women coaches, right? That's Title VII. I'm not a lawyer, but I play one at work occasionally. So the Title IX benefits are things that female coaches have been fighting for years. They've been fighting to get their students all of these benefits, but they're not necessarily the beneficiaries of those. I think as more female decision makers are in place, that more apologize, I'm not sure what you can hear of my internet being unstable, but as more female decision makers are being hired, I think that's obviously what's making a big difference in having women really believe that they're looking really carefully and trying to find I think the women understand how valuable it is for the female students to have female mentors. And I took that for granted. All of my high school and college coaches were females. And, it seemed like that would always be the case. And that's really just not true anymore. Ironically, also because a lot of high school coaches are male now, and club coaches, whether they're fathers who think they might have known something about the sport, but they're willing to coach. So a lot of female students come in and they don't have experience with women coaches. So they express a preference for men as coaches. So that makes it really also complicated from a hiring standpoint. So anyway, there are a lot of challenges out there to make sure that we're going to be able to continue to provide female student athletes with the mentors that they can. But in terms of the evolution, which I know is the other part of your question, I think an example is that when I was growing up, I loved ice hockey. The Boston Bruins were my first favorite team, who's all the numbers that I memorized, and I watched every game. But there weren't really school teams in ice hockey. There were club teams, but they were expensive, and for a lot of good reasons, my parents steered me towards the high school teams that were right across the street and free. So I was happy to play field hockey and soccer, basketball, softball, everything else that they had. And if I had played ice hockey, I wouldn't have gone to Bates, right? Because they didn't have an ice hockey team, or even a rink, I might add. I think there was a club team that some girls played on, but it was mostly boys. So I think things have come. It's an example of how far things have come, that now there is a club team at Bates that has a women's club team, same as the men, right? That plays a full championship. When I started as an administrator of the very few college teams, one of the highlights of my career was watching a lot of Ivy League former hockey players play in the Olympics on the first gold medal winning team in 1998. And I was also the person who was the chair of the women's ice hockey committee in the NCAA that started women's ice hockey championship. So we went from having 4 teams when I started for all divisions 1, 2, and 3 in the championship. And now the NCAA has moved to having a beautiful championship that has 11 teams in the Division 1 and 8 teams in Division 3. So I think that's a great example of the progress that has been made and the opportunities that are out there for girls today.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely the huge theme of this panel, is kind of like looking towards the future and how we can continue to forge ahead for women and girls in sports, because as we've seen tonight, it's very important. So yeah, on kind of that theme of looking towards the future, I was wondering if the panelists would be able to give advice that that they would want the current and future women and girls in sports to know based off of their experiences. So Katie, if you would want to get us started with that question, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure, I'm happy to build on Carolyn's good news, which is, I think one thing I would say to young women growing up is, if you don't like the look of the room you're in, change the table or leave the room. And so what I would say is, like, at HubSpot, when I first arrived, it was myself and one other female executive. We were super nervous and anxious. And over the 9 years I've been there, we now have 3 women on our board. 4 of our 9 C-level executives are women. We've transformed our BIPOC diversity meaningfully. And so change is possible. It's very uncomfortable. And you certainly have experiences of frustration and isolation and loneliness. But I would just say, like, if you have the power to create real change, and I think sometimes it's easy to get frustrated by bad news. I got some really good feedback from one of our female engineers where she said, it's so important that we talk about the struggle, and it is. It's really important we talk about the struggle. But it's also important for young women that we don't talk so much about the struggle that becomes disinteresting to break into STEM or to break into technology. So I'm really cognizant as a woman at a tech company of how much I talk about the bad news versus the good news. And so I would just say, like, there's so many good things to celebrate. Even on this panel, I'm so inspired by this room. And so I would just say, like, there's a silver lining ahead of any moments of loneliness. And I think you can really break down and change those rooms or tables that you're in.
Definitely, that's awesome advice.
And Amanda, once we get through all the other panelists, I'm going to pose that question back to you. So start thinking of your.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. All right. Amelia, how about you? What advice would you offer to the next generation?
Yeah, I think that's great advice from Katie. And I think for me, like focusing on, thinking about the way that women's accomplishments are celebrated, kind of relative to men's accomplishments. I think ours deserve to be celebrated just as much. And I think we're moving towards that. But I think recognizing kind of the baggage and the history behind inequity, and bringing that to celebrate even louder when good things happen. I think that's my advice.
That's great advice. Thank you. And Teal, what advice would you like to share to the next generation?
I would say that community is not only what you think it is immediately. So a good example that I often forget that I love to talk about is that although I was a thrower for the Bates College team, because throwing is so not that seen really, it's sometimes our throwing circle is like a mile away from the actual track where the audience is. Your best friend, and often my biggest cheerleaders, were the people that I was competing against. Those people were the people who were rooting out for me. Those people were also the people that I was looking forward to seeing at nationals, because we were the only people from the Northeast and everybody else was from the Midwest and from the West Coast. Those are the folks, so community is who and what you define. It's just because you are forced in a box and you're told that you're in this box does not mean that you need to stay in that box, and it doesn't mean that you have you don't have any say to who can be in that box with you and what your boundaries actually look like. And so I would encourage and implore the next generation to continue to push and figure out what your community really looks like, and don't think that your community has to be just the teammates that you have on your that are on the roster with you. They could be just the people that you compete against you every day, every meet, and make you better. And those are some of your biggest champions in the end.
Yes, definitely. I can, not as a thrower, but I can definitely speak to kind of that community of track and field. And sometimes your biggest cheerleaders are the people you're competing against, for sure. And Nancy, what about you? What advice would you like to share?
gosh, I'm good at giving advice. I think, it's really simple. I think just as simple as just show up. Show up for the things that you've chosen. And it's, whatever they say is success is 99% just being there. And I tell that to the kids I coach. And I expect that of the people I work with. And any less to me isn't good enough. But showing up and being there and trying is it seems really simple, but it's one of those things. And I do agree with don't put yourself in a box. Be willing to try new things, and you'll be surprised. And if you never try something new, you'll never be surprised. So simple things like that is what I'm going to offer.
I love that. And those go such a long way for sure. And to round us out, Carolyn, what about you? What advice would you like to share?
So a couple of things. First, enjoy your athletic experience, embrace it, and it goes by really fast. But obviously, as you can tell from all of the panelists here, I'm 40 years out, right? So, and it still impacts my daily life, really, about the experience that I had and how it formed me as a person. And the second is more about how you demand respect and demand equality in all aspects of the things that you do. And it's a lesson that it took me a while to learn, was that you don't get what you deserve, you get what you ask for, and you get what you fight for, and you get what you work for. So make sure that you're in honor of the people who have come before you and the work that they have done to provide the benefits that you have. Continue to fight and continue to make sure that you pay it forward so the next generation has it even better than you do.
Yeah, definitely. And as Katie kind of put it back towards me to go off of what you said, Carolyn, I totally agree. I really feel like there's this sort of like trickle down impact that I often think about how women and girls are portrayed kind of in the media and how we talk about them. Women and girls need to be involved in sport so much earlier on, so they know like they can do it. If you see it, you can be it. And I think that is something that we see kind of at all levels. So whether that's something like, Instagram handles saying, Bates basketball, and then it's Bates women's basketball, like men's sports should not be the default. I think stuff like that, it's really the little things that are so important. And I think we just need to encourage kind of the women and girls around us and encourage them to like, go get it, go get after it, be aggressive, get dirty, sweat, like don't be afraid to limit yourself as a woman. So yeah, thank you everyone for sharing. And now I would love to kind of open it up for questions from the audience. If anybody has one, we can kind of drop it in the chat for our panelists. I'll just kind of give a few seconds here if any members of the audience wanted to submit some questions for our panelists.
While we're waiting for questions, potentially, Amanda, I think one thing that Teal mentioned earlier that I think is such an important reminder for all of us is celebrating trans athletes as part of this conversation. I think Bates is lucky to have been such an innovator on that front. And I remember from my time there with Keelan, I just think right now there's such a war on trans athletes. And so as we're talking about gender and all the opportunities that's been open to all of us, I think we've got to make sure we are all part of changing the landscape for how welcoming sports are to people of all genders and to trans folks in particular, because that particular assault is acute right now. And I think it's important to celebrate Bates on one side and then stay vigilant in the communities we're operating in so that trans folks have the opportunity to play as well.
Yes, for sure. I actually wrote my gender studies thesis on trans athletes and looking at how we can foster inclusion going forward. And I think kind of what it all boils down to is sport at the end of the day gives people, whoever you are, however you identify, it gives people so much. And as a society, why would we want to limit that? Yeah, just because like we're all better when people get to push themselves and be involved in sport. So thank you for highlighting that for sure. All right, so it actually looks like we have some questions from the audience. So the first one, would you talk about the need to prioritize studies and sports? So how you remain disciplined and manage your time and focused, and any suggestions you can offer to student athletes today. So I'll just pose that to whoever wants to speak to that. Go right ahead.
I guess I can start as the most recent student. I mean, I think that I found as a student athlete that practice really added structure to my day. I think knowing exactly, both in the sense of like knowing exactly when was time that I could not be doing anything else, and also more importantly in the sense of like having those 3 hours where I couldn't think about anything else because it would be affecting me. I think, you know, I think practice really balanced my life in a lot of different ways, mentally and logistically. And I when I think about my time at Bates, and, you know, I was like busy doing a lot of things. I think the way that you are successful in balancing things is you have support. And so I know my teammates were a huge aspect of both building me up when I didn't think I could do it, and also helping me through different things. So knowing how to ask for help and how to ask for support, and also being kind to yourself and recognizing that it's not always going to be the perfect balance. It's not always graceful. I think people thought that every second was graceful, but that's not true. So yeah, kindness, friendship, balance.
Definitely. Yeah, that's definitely something I feel like me and my teammates kind of always say, that we feel like we actually kind of prioritize better when we are in season, just because you kind of have to. And I think that's just yet another skill that sport teaches us. Thank you, Amelia. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question? If not, we have a few other ones that we can get talking about. If no, okay. So someone else is wondering if the panelists still have any athletic outlets, and if so, what does that entail?
Nancy, I think you're on mute.
Oh, hello. Yes, I can speak to that. And I guess I never really stopped being an athlete. You know, I've just carried it forward. And I think once you've experienced the feeling of moving through space on skis or with the ball, or it's something, it becomes ingrained. And I know plenty of people who never, you know, went back to any athletic activity after college or whatever, but I felt it just was a way for me to communicate and to be with myself. And I honestly think that it shouldn't be a guilty pleasure. It's a way to do something for yourself. And actually, in turn, that does things for people around you, because you've taken care of yourself. And if you're motivated by your sport or the need to move and to repeat something that's pleasurable for your mind and body, then by all means, I think you should go for it. And so I've been a runner ever since I retired from skiing, and I've skied, and I just once in a while jump in a running race or a skiing race, and I still have so much fun with it. And I think you don't really ever retire, you just change your
Outlet.
Yeah, your aspirations, and you do it, really, it's your chance to do it just for the pleasure of doing something like that. And so I think I've had more fun with sport since I'm not a professional athlete anymore.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah, I think kind of capitalizing on that fun, because sports are supposed to be fun, and that, yeah, sometimes can get lost. So thank you. And it looks like actually we have one more question from the audience who actually is one of my teammates. Shout out to Mary Richardson. Thank you for submitting this question. So Mary is wondering, what advice did you give to be soon to be graduates for entering the real world? And Mary writes that she is anxious about adulting. And I see, Katie, you kind of answered that a little bit in the chat. So feel free to expand on that if anyone else wants to hop in.
I just think, first of all, it's so nice of her to support you, Amanda. I love a good teammate, always showing up on that front. But what I typed in the chat is everyone is faking it. One of the things you realize as an adult is basically all confidence is faked. My mom, who's joining us on the panel tonight, used to tell us to practice our Beyonce walk. And your Beyonce walk is basically like, does Beyonce walk in a room and be like, oh, I don't know. No, she of course does not. She like struts into that room. And so you have to practice that. And so I would just say, like, everyone else is trying to figure it out. No one else has things figured out. And so just remind yourself of that. There is no playbook that the rest of us have figured out that you don't have. And Bates makes you a kind, curious person and teaches you to be kind to others. And so you're already well ahead of most fully formed adults.
I would say something else about being an adult or going into the world. No matter what sport you did, and no matter at what point in gosh knows what happens with this pandemic, remember that because you did that sport, and no matter what level, if you're at a club level, if you went to the NCAAs, what have you, you have a niche. You have a skill. You have a skill that you can profit from that skill in hard times. And for me, thinking about the last question about what you do post and now, and, you know, at one point I didn't have, when I graduated in a recession, and I was working as an AmeriCorps volunteer, wasn't making really any money, and needed money in my pocket. And I told all of the local high school track and field teams that I would take their kids, because none of them had actual throwers, and I would teach them if they all like gave me $20 a month, like if they figured that out in their budget. And like, it's that resourcefulness that Katie's talking about. You know, it's the opportunity to truly value your self-worth. You have gotten to this point in which you have worked so hard to be successful in your sport, to be successful in your academics, to be successful as a person. That is what you, every day, that is what you lean on. That is what you remind yourself you have. That is what shoots you, like Katie said, beyond others, but also it makes you feel and it reinstills the fact that you will be seen. No one can take that away from, and no one can truly take that away from you, because nobody except for you were in the library sweating over the books, or in the gym sweating out the reps. Only you know that experience. Everyone else that was around you only are bystanders. You are the person who can do it. And so with that, you taking that into the world, and any interaction that you make, from meeting someone on the street to selling yourself with an opportunity that no one ever truly thought they actually needed, is yours and yours alone. And you need to continue to continue to remind yourself that. I think one of those things that unfortunately happens, and we end up finding a lot of women leave they easily leave their sport from high school into college, is because they have all these outside pressures, all these voices that aren't their own, and weren't there, didn't hear, didn't know all of the work that they put into it. And it sways you, but you have to just stay grounded, and you have to and know that when you graduate, you will find a job. It may not come tomorrow, it might come tomorrow, but you have to continue to know your self-worth, and know that you will get there, and you will get there and succeed and be the best that you could be.
Wow.
I want to throw in one other thing, which is that I think one of the hardest things when you leave the Bates cocoon is that you're surrounded by all of your favorite people all the time. And when you go out into the world, you're not necessarily anymore. But the technology will, like this exact technology, will allow you to be able to keep in touch, right? And to be able to make sure to reach out to your friends and your teammates and be trying to keep all those relationships strong so that you continue to have that same network. And I know I have a lot of people on the phone right now who are giving me support, even 40 years later, my teammates and classmates. So shout out to all of them.
Wow. Thank you. Wow, that was an amazing kind of bookend to an incredible panel and with incredible women. So yeah, thank you everyone for engaging in this conversation. I feel, again, extremely honored to be here moderating all of this. And selfishly, I was very, very excited just to kind of sit down and chat with all of you as a female athlete myself. So again, thank you all for being here, and thank you for all that you have done, whether that's on the playing surface or off. And yeah, thank you. You truly have, each of you, emulated the theme of leading her forward. And I have lots of hope that our future is bright, and it's all because of the trailblazing work of people like you guys. So thank you again. And yeah, that's a wrap, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Great job.